Good morning, everybody. Yes, I'm a former Wall Street analyst, and I still have a little wolf in me, but not that bad. So welcome to our session here. Good morning. How many of you are excited about an economics discussion at 9 a.m.? Come on, yeah. I knew you guys were looking forward to this one, huh? It's just sort of like what happened when you picked your class schedule incorrectly in college. Or maybe correctly, actually, because it was a good place to sleep, right? The 9 to 10:30 class, you could just like catch those Z's and you'd be fine. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about this legal disclaimer, actually, right here. We're a publicly traded company, so before I say anything, I have to warn you that there's forward-looking statements, and the legal team has scrubbed everything that I've said, so I have to be very, very much on point with that. Economics. Let's get this going. Economics is extremely useful as a form of employment for economists. That's the truth. So it's kind of tough when you're with a bunch of tech people and you work for a software company to talk about the economics of a model. I'm going to give that a shot here, you guys. So today we're going to talk about three things. We're going to talk about cost, time, and risk. We'll talk about predictability, and we'll talk about customer success and how that fits into everything, because I think if there's one thing I leave you with, that's the underlying thread. Economics mean nothing unless you get that part right. So I was a Wall Street analyst for a long time covering the software sector and wrote about software as a service back when we didn't call it cloud, we called it on demand. And one of the things that was so interesting about this change, and this is going back 15, 16 years ago, was how the scales are tilting in favor of the customer. I'm going to talk a little bit about that because in the old days, how many of you guys used to live or deploy or sell or utilize on-premise software? Right? It was the moral equivalent of a drive-by shooting. It was. I work for an ERP company, and so we were probably my forefathers were probably the guilty parties of this. But they would show up, they would basically dump a bunch of software on your doorstep. They would collect all the money, and then another school bus of people would show up who had nothing to do with the building the software, right? And they would charge you 7, 8 times as much as the software company charged you to screw it into your system. I mean, it was kind of a bummer. And so when I think about it, like the whole model was a really tough deal for the customer. I think we're finally at the point where we've made this shift, right? We like to say it's the end of legacy software as we know it. But think about this. The customizations, it was kind of ugly. Nobody liked to use it, right? You implement once, you could never upgrade it. And these systems there were beastly closed systems that you couldn't actually integrate other things into. And I remember, this is going to date myself a little bit, but I remember back in 2003, 2004, and we were coming out of this nasty tech bubble, and we kept wondering, when are customers going to start spending money on software again? When are they going to start spending money on hardware again? And it sort of never happened. Like, I think we hit that limit where customers had enough, right? They had enough of the old way. And simultaneously, we had this revolution starting with the NetSuites and the Salesforces and the early cloud players who were coming with a new model. Now, clearly, there wasn't enough technology that was viable to replace everything in 2000 or 2001 or 2004. But the seeds were being sown, if you will, of how do you shift that model in favor of the customer. And so some of the tenets that we think about around how do you deliver ROI to customer, and these are slides that we use, but we frankly have built them up from thousands of deployments and customer feedback and things like that. But real tenets, you want to get your users up and running quickly, right? The middle part here, concentrating on adding value. This is one of those slides that it sounds like a really bad business school textbook thing, but I'll give you a story. When I was an analyst, I was at an IBM financial meeting where they were bragging about their business model. And IBM used to, not today so much, they used to say, for every dollar of SAP that was sold, we sell 8 times as much hardware and consulting. And that was their badge of honor. They're like, we're 8x the software. And you sit there and you go, my God, what a tax. What a tax on customers. What a tax on innovation. And you think about what all those people were doing, right? There wasn't a lot of productive value. I mean, in 1995, I took a class at the University of Southern California in R3 Enterprise Engineering. And we didn't get it started until about 3/4 of the way through the semester because we just couldn't get the system configured. It was kind of a bummer, right? It took that long just to get the system up and running, right? Think about what that does to your business. And the last piece is, how do you get time to value? And I think what you're starting to see happen now is that these tenets are not any one company's beliefs, it's the industry's belief. We've made, I think, a massive leap over the last decade to fix, if you will, those underlying models that were skewed in favor of the vendor, and now they're in favor of the customer. So what's in it for the vendor? You'll hear software as a service companies or cloud companies talk about predictable revenue, right? How do you actually build that recurring subscription revenue that every day grows, right, as you sell more to customers and you renew the customers you have? The thing I want to walk you through, though, I think it's important, is this is an investment that you have to make. This little chart here, or this little diagram, shows, if you will, cash flow to the vendor. And the simple takeaway is it probably takes you roughly 3 years. You know, this is a simple unit economic example, just sort of looking at like what does the old model look like compared to the new model. And you realize whether it's any of the companies that are public, you go look at their financials, you can pretty easily see that there's a upfront cost that goes along with making this transition. It's obviously harder if you're a legacy company and you're trying to move to the cloud, given you have an old business model. But even in these new companies, you're going to see a prolonged period where you're investing, if you will. You're investing in customer success because you're actually not going to generate a break even on that customer for a couple years. Now, this next slide, I don't want to dwell on it too long, but I think there's a power in a recurring revenue model. This is actually NetSuite's revenue over the last decade. And what we put on there were all the bad things that have been happening in the last decade from an economic standpoint. And you know, the point of this is you can grow a recurring subscription business through lots of bad times if you do one thing right. And this is what we're here for. The one thing that you have to do right is to keep your customers successful. High retention rates, if you will, are the mother's milk of the recurring revenue model. Churn is an evil, nasty thing, something that you have to avoid, something that you have to commit to, something that you have to really weed out. And there's a lot of different ways that you do it. You guys are obviously going to hear a lot yesterday and today about how to make customers successful and ways to really deliver that. I think this is probably the one piece that if you go back 15 years and you look at the history books on what's changed in our industry is this core principle. This is our brag slide at NetSuite, and I'm not going to stick on it too long, but I want to say, this is the thing as a company we're most proud of, is our 30,000 organizations that run on us. Whether it's big companies, little companies, disruptive companies, we care most about this slide because this slide is us showing that we're taking care of those customers. How do we do it, right? What gets us up every morning is making sure that those customers succeed. So I know we said this is an economics discussion, but what I want to go into a little bit more are these pillars that underpin customer success. And I think the things that are driving our industry that are going to cause more businesses to look like our business, your business, technology businesses. So the 5 things that we talk about, every company is a cloud company, adaptability, data aggregation. I think this is going to be one of those things that if I have to look out 5-10 years from now, we're just scratching the surface on. How do you deliver global, but also respect and recognize the local issues? And then the last thing that I'll leave you with is this startup state of mind. So let me hit through these real quick. Every company is a cloud company. What do we mean by that? resumes, friends, sports, transportation, you and I, we're all connected, right? Every day now, the businesses that we engage with, whether it's a software company or a hardware company, right, or a transportation, there's an app, right? Every company is going to have this in their DNA if they want to succeed. Now, we think about our business as a collection of vertical industries. And so when I look at a lot of the verticals that we serve, I find really interesting stories. So retail, right? If you think about the state of retail today, it's all about omni-channel, right? It's all about a brand having engagement with you as a customer, whether it's on the phone, whether it's in the store, whether it's on the website. It's that personalized nature, right? Retailers today are under assault. Amazon spends billions of dollars a year. You best believe that if you're a retailer, you're a cloud company. Manufacturing is going through a whole host of changes. We see everyday manufacturers that design in California, manufacture in China, assemble in Mexico, and then omni-channel distribute throughout the globe, right? These companies, by default, right, are global, connected, collaborative. That's what they have to do to survive. Wholesale distribution, the other side of the coin in terms of how the products actually get to market. You guys probably in the room, I would assume, know a lot about software and services, but just think about the software business today. Think about billing. I got excited with an email 2 days ago from my favorite coffee company sending me a note that they were offering advanced order management for my billing so they could split my subscription delivery between home and work. I'm excited about billing features. But you know what? That's the relationship I have with them. I can now actually manage where I want my delivery sent. Like little things like that, controls in my hands that I can actually have. Lesson 2, adaptable to change. Now, in the old days, this was one of the problems with software, was you implemented once, and then you hoped to God that that was the last time your business ever changed. And as we know, it always changed. So the thing that we like to talk about is business model innovation, is that your business today has to be ready for new markets, new pricing, new products, bundles, services, right? New channels. This is what software is today. It's a living, breathing thing, right? It has to be adaptable to working with other technologies around us. It's interesting that we've moved, I think, as an industry into a period where connectivity is no longer as difficult as it was, say, 5 years ago or 10 years ago. So you're actually seeing more companies collaborate, more companies partner. You're seeing multiple solutions brought together. Those are things that were incredibly hard to do last decade. One of the slides that we use is customization is not a dirty word. Now, if you've ever implemented business applications, customization was a really bad swear word. It meant you were going to spend gobs and gobs of money. But these are the core principles today, right? We do this, but every software vendor needs to be doing this. A lot of them you're going to see are all on the same release. It's amazing the power that comes with that, right? All the customers running the same version. Now, there's benefits in terms of being able to roll out new features, but I think there's another benefit that our industry is just starting to scratch the surface on, which is data aggregation. And I'm going to go back to the slide I showed you earlier. LinkedIn, Facebook, GoPro, Lyft, Uber, you and I with gadgets on our bodies. Those are cloud companies, but they're also data aggregation companies, right? They're aggregating data about usage, about behavior. We're gonna put the privacy issue to the side for a second because that's actually a little bit of a thorny thing depending on where you're at and what industry. But just think about it if you're a software company. You now know what features your customers are using. You now know which customers aren't engaged. You now know where you actually need to proactively target and find out how do you solve the problem for a particular customer. This is probably one of the most exciting things, I think, from a vendor standpoint, in terms of how we actually can use that data for good and actually driving more benefit to the customers. This is one of those slides that we aggregate, and we run this every month, where we look at in our system, if you will, all the SKUs we manage, sales orders, POs, the amount of data we're adding, right? This is data that you never had 10 years ago, right? We learn all sorts of interesting things about what our customers are doing, about the processes that they're running. And this slide, if you will, is what drives a lot of the product roadmap. Tells us where we need to spend more money on, tells us what we need to do a better job at, tells us where our customers are going from their actual business processes. Now, the fourth piece that I think is worth considering on this customer success journey is think global and deliver local. I think at no other point in time in history have we seen so many small businesses start as global firms. Across the board, the idea that you're just going to sell in your home market, that you're not going to have customers or suppliers from all over the world, I think is really a kind of a quaint notion. What we see, and we see this across our customers, is that almost every business has to think through multi-currency, multi-tax, multi-language. How do you actually manage complexity in your business? These core principles of being a global company, I believe, are part of the requirements to be successful. When I think back 10, 15 years ago to the old software companies and the struggles that they had, you found, if you will, high burden to get into new markets. You found high burden to reaching customers in areas that wanted to buy software. I think what you're seeing today, and I think you can say this collectively as the industry, we're bringing down these barriers to adoption. You know, I'll use one example that we saw in the SaaS business 10, 12 years ago. Started to see a lot of the software as a service companies move into Asia first. And it was funny, the old playbook was go into Europe, right? If you think about it, everybody starts in the US, they sell to US companies, and then they go to the UK. But you're starting to see companies just go immediately to sell to Asia. Asia companies were a little more willing to adopt cloud technology than some of the more conservative European firms. And the fact that these systems were built to be global from day one, it wasn't as big of an issue to sort of pivot your business and go where the demand was, go where these great emerging markets were, selling into China, selling into Japan, obviously Australia, New Zealand, but kind of hitting that. My favorite stories that I hear when I go out and talk to customers are some companies who say, you know, we didn't know what to do, we were running into a wall, and we went to China, and we used cloud technology to open up a new market, and that's grown our business 20%. And you hear that, and you're like, these are relationships, right? These are things that you couldn't do with the old business model, right? This is where, I know we talked about this being an economics discussion, but economics are only underpinned by the success that you can enable your customers to do. Economics is a measurement, right? It's a way to keep score. So it's a big point to think about. The last thing I wanted to touch on here is this notion of a startup state of mind. You can apply this to a lot of different things, but I think when you examine the nature of what keeps a customer coming back to you, what drives a high renewal rate, right? What makes your software sticky? It's constantly evolving. Now, one of the challenges that I see our customers having, I'm going to throw up this picture. She's a friendly-looking millennial, right? But we talk about digital disruption being this generation's Y2K. She is either your favorite new customer or she's your worst nightmare. Because she's not going to buy from you the way her parents bought from you. She's not going to use our software the way that, someone before her used our software. And so the question is, how do you adapt, right? How do you service that customer? How do you use that, if you will, that image as a cohort of your customer base? How do you think about the new users you have, what they expect from you as a vendor? And I think that determines, if you will, a lot of your future success. So we have one little cute slide that I like to call, small companies must act big, right? If you're a startup today, you can actually do some really amazing things in terms of competing with established firms, right? The cost to deploy are much smaller or lower than they were. You can reach global markets today like you never could, and you can actually build these amazing relationships. But the big companies out there, they also have to change, right? They have to act small, right? More and more what we see are the large companies saying, I don't want to get disrupted. I don't want to get Amazoned or Ubered or pick your poison, if you will. How do we actually change our business? And I think what you're starting to really see happen is this notion of change in large companies becoming, if you will, this sort of seminal moment. And I feel like it's been the last couple years where delighting customers through engagement has gone from, if you will, sort of a Harvard Business Review article or a Wall Street Journal article into something that you have to embed into your core business. I think 2015, 2016, 2017, these years we're going to look back on and say, wow, a lot really changed. How did we build these connections and engagement cycles and analytics that service those customers? I think it's happening now, guys. I think we're at the point in the evolution in the software industry where we're delivering the technology that whether you're big or small, you can actually drive this level of interaction. But as I think about the thread here, if I tie it back to the original point on the slide around the economics of this model, these are the pieces, right? If you build a system that engages and keeps your customers happy, all the economics fall into place. The economics is the output. It's the outcome. You can measure, if you will, the old and the new. But building these principles that drive customer success, I think, are what makes you separate or differentiate and separate from your competition.